Well, that's what I had for you today, and now I'd like to welcome any questions from any of you in the audience about anything I've had to say or any comments. Or, you certainly, of course, welcome to take a break if you wish as well. Anyone have any questions? Okay, buddy.
There's something that's always bothered me. I'm trying to figure out. It talks about the growth falling away that comes. When could that possibly happen?
What he's asking about is the great falling away, which is in Second Thessalonians. That's all. Just turn back there. Hold your question back there. This might take a minute. Second Thessalonians. Second Thessalonians 2, right? Yeah. Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and by our gathering together with him, that ye be not soon shaken in mind or troubled, and by spirit or by word or by letter, as from us that the day of Christ is at hand. Now, why would he say that? Anybody know? The reason he says it is because in the first letter, he just all but told them that the day of Christ was at hand. What's happened here is if you go back and read 1 Thessalonians, especially that 4th chapter, it sounds for all the world like Paul is saying, hey, folks, it's right around the corner. Christ is coming. Well, they took him in a way, I guess, that he didn't intend to be taken. He'd heard about it. He said, hold it. Let's don't get too shaken up about this. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there be an apostasy first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, this is really interesting, and a lot of people have struggled with this particular passage of Scripture. There are several things, that you can take from it. One is, it's an apostasy. An apostasy, or a falling away. Now, in order to apostatize, you've got to been somewhere. In other words, to fall away from the truth, you have to have been in the truth. And so a lot of people wonder, looking at the world today, well, where is this apostasy going to come from? And is it going to be an anti-Christian type of thing? Is it going to be for example, many people, I think that this this man of sin that's to come on the scene, or the Antichrist, to compare him with the Antichrist later, will be an Islamic leader. Someone from the Muslim world who are anti-Christian, as it were. And of course, their record down through the centuries after Muhammad is a very bloody one of being opposed to Christians, Jews, and everybody else in general. And their creed was, accept Islam or die, which was one of the most effective evangelistic tools ever used in the history of mankind. But this doesn't fit with an Islamic leader. Does anybody know why? Yeah. Because of the fact that he claims to be God. There is no religion on the face of this earth that is more rigidly, inflexibly monotheistic than Islam. And consequently, anyone who claimed to be God, see, this is the big bone to pick that the Muslims have with Christians, is that we claim that Jesus is also God, and God, the Father is God. And so they see us as polytheists, and therefore heathen, and therefore very much in need of conversion. So you've got to keep that in mind with these people. Now, the exact nature of the apostasy, I got a real good answer for that. I don't know. I think it is important for us, though, I think in a way it's important for us not to decide what it is. For what my experience has been is when people get a theory of what something like this is, and they expound the theory, then they have to begin to bolster it from every side and defend it against attacks from all areas, and it becomes more and more rigid and more inflexible. And to me, that is a good formula for finding yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time, looking in the wrong direction when all hell breaks loose on this planet. So, to me, it's very important that you not decide right now what this is, but that you recognize, it is an apostasy. That's a tremendous falling away. How that would be interpreted, what it could possibly mean, is very, very difficult to fathom at this time. Now, I do believe that in times gone by, a lot of Protestant teachers have seen in the man of sin the Pope. And they have focused on the Roman Catholic Church as the great horror of Revelation 17 and 18 and developed whole edifices of prophecy based upon this idea. The problem with this is that the Roman Catholic Church is nowhere near the monolithic edifice that non-Catholics seem to think it is. The Roman Catholic Church has a very checkered history. And there have been times in their history when there were two popes, not one. And they were sitting in different cities, pointing the finger at one another and excommunicating one another from, whatever church it was. So if you think about that and you realize it, that the Roman Catholic Church simply developing into and out of the clear blue sky, all of a sudden you've got some powerful individual at the head of the church doing all sorts of great things, is one of the most unlikely things in the world to happen if things continue along a normal course. But if you had two popes, if you have major schism in the Roman Catholic Church, if you have then another man coming in from outside or coming out of that church and forming yet another religion, that sort of thing could put the Roman Catholic Church under stress, under pressure, that would bring a lot of things to pass. And so the possibility this man of sin may not at this point be a leader of any recognizable or recognized institution that exists right now. It may be something that comes out of the apostasy, whatever that apostasy may be, and whatever it apostatizes from. I just let you that part of it without, too much speculation. Got a follow-up question, or is that good enough for now? Okay. You still have a question? Oh, yes.
My question is off the subject here, but it regards Acts 15.
Acts 15?
I heard you speak once, and I cannot recall exactly how you explained the four things that the Gentiles were to follow from the law.
Yeah. Acts 15. There is an awful lot in this question. There's a lot in this question. It is not just a quick answer to this one.
Those four were selected.
The short answer to that is that those four were selected because they were major problems in the Gentile churches. And this whole issue that has arisen here at this time has to do with the Gentiles who are now coming into the church in droves. Very much contrary to the will, by the way, of an awful lot of people in the church. The first century church was very divided over this question. And a lot of them did not like the idea at all that the church was being, well, in their words, probably overwhelmed by Gentiles. They weren't supposed to be there. And so consequently, the question arose in Antioch, we got to command these people to be circumcised and keep the law of Moses in order to be saved, which is a huge ball of things to require of these people. And you also have to realize that for many of the people who were early Christians, who were Jews, who came from Judaism and they were still very steeped in Judaism. But you also got to remember that Judaism is not the religion of the Old Testament. Judaism is the structure that the Jewish people, it's the response of the Jewish people to the revelation of the God of the Old Testament. And that's different. And consequently, an entire edifice of rules, regulations, beliefs, and what have you were built up around this thing. The washing of pots and pans, there's some different rituals, the forbidding to eat with Gentiles, whole long strings of things, many, many laws that they had put together. Sorry? I'm sorry? Yeah, or traditions, or in modern terminology, the oral law. The term oral law, as important as it is in Judaism today, is not even mentioned in the New Testament. It's interesting. But it is. It's there. It's there in the traditions of the elders. That's what they're talking about, because what Jews today call the oral law had not really gotten full formulation at that time. It was the traditions of the elders. It was in the late 1st century, 2nd century, that the Mishnah began to finally be put into writing, and the Jews made one of the biggest mistakes they have made in their history. They reduced their oral law to a written law, and that was a mistake. And a lot of this was done, by the way, because of the incredible wave of influence that Christianity was having in the world at that time. And many people believe that the reason why it finally was written down, the Talmud began to be developed, was because of the Christian religion. And you will find a lot of response to the Christian faith, if not directly stated so, indirectly stated so, in many of the things that are written in there. So it's a reactive document insofar as that goes. Now, but in the time of Jesus, Judaism had a very large complex of things that they felt, all of them believed, were very much required of them in order to be in the faith. And so consequently, when Paul was at Antioch and these people came up in Jerusalem and said, you got to be circumcised, keep the law of Moses to be saved, they raised a huge barrier to the church. Now, there are two related passages of Scripture. I don't have notes on them, so I'll have to let you turn to them. Another time. Make a note on them, perhaps. But one of them is Deuteronomy 17. In Deuteronomy 17, there's a little short statement that says, if there arise a matter for you in judgment that's too hard for you, between blood and blood, between plea and plea, between stroke and stroke, you get up, you go to the judges, and that shall be in those days, and present your case. And they will tell you what you got to do. Okay? Now, it goes on to say that when you have done that, first of all, bear in mind you don't have to go if it's not too hard for you. Who gets to decide if it's too hard for you? You do. Okay? But if you do go, it's like binding arbitration. You go down there, you present your case, and if they give you a decision, he says, you are bound by that decision. You're not to turn aside to the right or to the left. And in fact, very clear that he says that. This takes on really all the force of the law when that decision is rendered. This is a judgment, and it goes into the law as a judgment at that time. Okay. Then there came this day when Jesus and his disciples were sitting around. There's a connection. And they asked, he said, who do men say that I am? And they said, well, some say you're Moses, some say Elijah, and so forth. He says, who do you say I am? And Peter said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. Flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you. My Father has revealed this to you. And I say unto you, you're Peter, and upon this rock, and they're, by the way, different words, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I'll give to you the kings of the kingdom of heaven. And whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Now understand carefully. He never at any time allows anyone to bind or loose anything contrary to the written law. Not possible. Well, what he does give them the authority to do is to bind or loose matters having to do with traditions and with judgments and with oral law. In other words, the term for it in Judaism is halakhic authority. It's a judgment authority having to do with the way we walk and live our lives. He gave halakhic authority to his disciples for the church so that we are not dependent upon the Jewish oral law, not bound by the Jewish oral law. We are perfectly free to consult it and learn from it because that's all the Jews really see it as for, is to consult it, to learn for it, and to study it. That the Talmud is not even supposed to be used as a decision or can't make rulings from the Talmud. Rulings can only be made from the oral law. And the Talmud is given to give one learning or understanding. And that's what the word means, I think, is learning. So, when we put all this stuff together, and it sounds like I'm going around the barn on this, I guess I am, but the point simply is, the disciples now come up against a major question they have to answer, and they can't find a clear and definitive answer in the written law. So they come to Jerusalem to consult with the apostles and elders about it, and that's what the whole 15th chapter is all about. They argued, they discussed, they debated, which was common among Jews of this time. Much disputing is what they did, and in the end of it all came out. They concluded that there was no earthly reason to command that Gentiles be circumcised when you understand the origin of circumcision. And then toward the end of the chapter, they say that the only thing that we feel we must warn these people about is about things strangled, things blood, the 4 items that they told them about. Why these? Well, because these were singular problems. One of them was fornication. A part of the Gentile religions of this time was that there were temple prostitutes. And actually going to the temple, paying your money, having sex with a priestess, was a religious act. And as a consequence, it was a part, and fornication was a way of life among those people. The only difference between the Corinthians and us is that sex is not a religious act. But fornication is just as common among us today as it was among them. And so the warning is, don't be shacking up, and don't be having sex with people you're not married to. They felt a need to warn the Gentiles of this because it was a problem. They also needed to warn them about things strangled and from blood, for various and sundry other, these were problems in their religions and their faith at that time. Okay? Then they went on to say, let's warn them about these 4 things. And then he said a curious thing. He said, because in every city, Moses is read in the synagogue on every Sabbath day. Now, why would he have said that? What relevance, possible relevance, could that have had to the discussion at hand? Well, I only see two possible explanations for it. One is there's a real danger of these people hearing Moses read in the synagogue every day because they'll be burdened down by all the laws that God has given them. The other one is we don't have to tell them about the rest of the written law because it's being read in the synagogue every Sabbath day and they can hear it there. We don't have to hand down a whole new set of laws to these people, but we want to emphasize these four. I think that's the reason why that was said. Do you have a follow-up question on that?
They were to follow the laws of the.
I'm sorry?
In other words, they were to follow the laws.
Yeah,
Of Moses,
yeah. Well, the written law.
or the written.
But now I'm going to explain that a little more thoroughly this afternoon.
Can we carry that a step further?
Yeah,
If today, are we under law or are we under grace?
we are under grace. Does that mean you can lie?
No.
Does that mean you steal?
Then what part of the law do we follow? Do we keep the feasts?
Pardon?
Do we keep the feasts?
I do.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah.
Now, where does the authority come from then to keep the feast? Because some we are incapable of keeping.
I'm sorry?
Some feasts we are incapable of keeping.
As
to, we cannot follow them through all the way as it was designed back in the Old Testament.
Oh, yeah, I understand that. Part of this I'm going to defer. I don't know how open you hear this afternoon, because I'm going to defer it to the message this afternoon, where I'm going to approach the law from an angle that, generally speaking, is not approached in people in my tradition. I have a different approach to the law. And so, consequently, some of this will be answered this afternoon. Jesus said in Matthew 5, and you're probably familiar with this, about verse 17, "Don't think I've come to destroy the law of the prophets. I have not come to destroy. Verily I say unto you, not one jot, not one tittle shall in any ways pass from the law till everything has come to pass." You know, he said, till heaven and earth pass. Now, that's a strong statement, and it creates problems, huge problems, if you have a certain theology of the law, a certain way of approaching the law, the problems suddenly become insoluble. Because the law permits the selling of your daughter to somebody else, the law permits the buying and holding of slaves, and a lot of many other things that create problems for us. And yet Jesus' statement is as clear as crystal. Till heaven and earth pass, not one jot, not one tittle shall in any ways pass from the law till everything has been fulfilled. Now, the word fulfilled there, by the way, is not the word that we normally mean, that Jesus fulfilled the law and therefore we don't have to. The sense of it is, and the word is not even the word normally for fill up, it is the word till everything has come to pass. Follow-up question, sir. Yes, go ahead.
Flip over to Romans 10:4, where Christ completed the law.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that, please?
Which verse?
10:4 in Romans.
Chapter 10. Actually, it didn't say he completed the law exactly. What it says is he is the end of the law, really. In mind, what translation are you using?
What is the difference in Christ?
The word means basically the objective of the law. In other words, we all know what the difference between means and ends, right? That we have means that get to ends, and we use the word end in that sense as the objective we're trying to reach. That's the sense in which the word is used here. Christ is not the end of the law. He's the objective of the law. If you take it that he is the end of the law, you run against, again, the problem is it okay to lie? Is it okay to steal? Is it okay to commit adultery? And all sorts of things begin to become problems if you take it that way. I don't take it that way. And as I said, I have a different theology of the law, which really, in order to adequately answer your questions, we've got to lay some groundwork. And I'll lay some of that again this afternoon. But anyway, I see this verse as Christ is the objective of the law. In other words, it brings us to him. And of course, one of the ways it brings us to him is it makes us realize that we are sinners. Yes, sir. You had another question or comment?
Yeah, several more, but I won't get into them. We can hear all day.
Well, I'm hoping, can you come back, Senator?
Oh, yes.
Okay, fine. Let's, I'll have a question and answer session after the afternoon session, and I will have laid some groundwork for this.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Another set of questions. You're all satisfied? Yes, sir. Bonnie?
Yes, chapter 11 of Revelation, verse 16, it talks about the 20 elders sent before God. What they come from?
I don't know. She asked, the 24 elders of Revelation. Said, where did they come from? I said, my answer, again, I have a real good answer to that. I don't know. Nobody does. The problem with Revelation is that it's a vision. And in visions, time doesn't mean a lot. As people oftentimes say about God, that God exists outside of time. Time doesn't exist for him. And one of the theories is that he's able to look past, present, future, and see everything, that ever was from where he is, even though to us it's one day at a time and one little notch at a time. That the 24 elders are people who are out of this age that ultimately wind up at the throne of God. I don't know. That answer is easy enough, but it doesn't resolve the problem for me. I think there are still problems with it. The presumption that I tend to make with that, just reading through it, is that they are like the angels of heaven, created beings. They are friends of God around his throne, elders in the sense of not necessarily being older, because I don't think anybody up there is either older or younger, but elders in the sense of administrative people that God talks to, relates to. That's about the only answer I can give that. Russ?
About sacred name. All through, any prayer, it says, if you will ask this in my name, is Jesus Christ his name, or these people that use sacred names, like Yeshua and Yahweh, which name makes any difference?
The question, you hear the question in the back? I don't know if you can hear it. Sacred names question. This is a fascinating question in many ways. The question is not so much sacred names as it is, I think some people put it, proper names of God. In other words, what language did Jesus and the Father speak at home? There is a presumption, I think many people have, that Jesus and the Father, sitting by each other on the throne in heaven, talking over our problems down here, speak to each other in Hebrew. I can guarantee you that's not the case. Because Hebrew is a very late developing language. Arabic is older than Hebrew. Hebrew is a human language. It's a corrupt human language. It is in Hebrew that God says the time is going to come in the future when I will turn to you a pure tongue, which suggests that Hebrew is really not. When Moses met God at the burning bush and he asked him, now these people, when I get down there, they're going to ask me what your name is. What am I supposed to tell them? And he said, I am that I am. You tell them, I am has sent you. Now, that's the English translation. The Hebrew word for I am is Hayah. I don't know how to pronounce that word for sure, because I do not know Hebrew that well. So, consequently, you would have thought that the name was Hayah. However, which is verses later, it turns out that the way the name is used is Yahweh, or Yehovah, or I don't know how many different ways there are that different sacred names group pronounce the name of God, and you can actually create a whole new sect on the difference between Yahweh and Yahweh in the way that God's name should be pronounced, and people will divide churches over this kind of thing. So the problem is, you raised the question initially in the prayer that ends in Jesus' name. In the Bible, Old Testament and New Time, to do something in someone's name it basically means to do it by their authority. What you are doing is you are asking God by the authority of Jesus Christ, because he gave you the authority to approach the Father. You follow me? It is not a question of the phonetic sound of the name. This is a huge question, and there are so many ways of going about it, but the most devastating thing about this, I think, and the thing that I have never been able, and I've been on internet forums by the hour, discussing this sort of thing with people. The problem that the sacred names people run into is the New Testament. Because in the New Testament, every ancient document that we have, and then the scholarly evidence, you can argue this case until you're black in the face with people who have made up their minds already on it, but if you just look at the scholarly evidence, the New Testament was written in Greek. Every bit of it was written, the original documents were Greek. It is possible that Matthew, it is possible that book of Hebrews were originally written in Hebrew and translated immediately into Greek, because, even in the lifetime of the author, or maybe even by the author himself, because Matthew is interesting. There is an old Hebrew version of Matthew, it goes back to the 9th or 10th century, that does not really show signs of having been translated from Matthew from Greek to English from Matthew. At the same time, the Greek New Testament Matthew shows no signs of having been translated from the Hebrew, and the scholars can figure this out, believe it or not. So it's possible that there were two manuscripts, one in Hebrew and one in Greek, in parallel, coming out of the first century. All of the documents that we have today of the New Testament are and have been traced in their origins to the first century by scholars, and it makes absolutely no sense for Paul to have written in anything but Greek to Greek churches where there were hardly any Jews in the congregation, right? Okay. Paul inevitably uses theos, the Greek word for God, in all of his letters. He does not use the Hebrew names for God anywhere in his letters. That being the case, there is no reason why anyone in the 20th century should feel obligated not to use English names as opposed to using Hebrew names. This is simple, because if it were otherwise, the New Testament would be otherwise. And for me, that closes that side of the issue down completely. I got nowhere to go with it. And there are some incredibly, and essentially, many of the sacred names people will argue that the New Testament, original New Testament, every bit of it, including all Paul's letters, were originally written in Hebrew. And somebody got hold of them and corrupted them, changed them all. Why do they say that? Here's the reason. Because it has to be that way for our theory of the sacred names to be correct. That's what it really boils down to. They arrive based upon their interpretation of certain Old Testament scriptures, that you can only speak God, you have to speak God's name, Yahweh, or in Jesus' case, Yehoshua or Yeshua. You have to do it that way, or you're being blasphemous virtually if you do it otherwise. But then when I come to Paul and he doesn't do it, but see, since their conclusion is it has to be that way, then these documents must have been written another way. This is called circular reason, or better yet, begging the question. And it simply doesn't work. Follow-up question? Okay. Do you want to follow up on that, or is that enough? That's enough? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Okay, you got another question.
All right. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah.
They're all talking about Jesus Christ. It's the story of their life. Now, Matthew, the subject is kingdom and king.
Mm-hmm.
They portray Jesus Christ as a kingdom and him as a king. Mark, and I read this time.
Yeah.
Mark portrays Christ as a servant. The whole book is something praising the servant. Luke as a man, and then John as a God.
Yeah.
Is that what you?
No, I can't say that's the way I look at them. I will say this, though. Yeah, I wouldn't. I'm not going to try to characterize, the subject matter of the Gospels in that way. What I will say is this, though, is that each of these men were writing at a different time in a different place to different people, and therefore there were certain things. There are little things that come out of the Gospels that if you're not paying attention, you'll miss. That are different, and you have to ask yourself, okay, why is he doing it this way? Well, we know, for example, that John wrote his epistle much, much, much later than the others did. And consequently, he has a different perspective on things than the others. He will say things when he writes his letter about the Feast of Tabernacles, a feast of the Jews. You would never write that if you were in Jerusalem writing to a bunch of Jews in Jerusalem, would you? You would never call the Feast of Tabernacles a feast of the Jews. You would have no reason to explain it at all. So, John was writing to whom? Gentiles. He had Gentiles in view as he wrote his gospel. By the time John wrote his gospel, I believe that a lot of things that Jesus had said had finally begun to make sense to them. Now, we're all familiar with this stuff. You hear something, and only later does the significance of the remark come home to you. It takes experience. It takes more information. You sort of begin, you collect this stuff over time, and a lot of times while you sleep, your brain sorts it all out. And then someday when you're relaxed and not paying any attention at all, it comes together. Well, when you read the gospel accounts, one of the things that you might marvel at from time to time is the obtuseness of the disciples. I mean, they don't seem to, you somewhere wonder, why didn't somebody smack them upside the head and say, get with it, boys? Which Jesus on occasion almost does. He says, he just marveled, at their lack of understanding. He marveled at their lack of belief. He says, don't you get this? The answer was no, they didn't get it. And it was only with the passage of time that they had the forehead slapping experience of finally coming to understand what it was that Jesus was driving at and to be able to put it together with what they knew. And I think this is the reason why you don't find Matthew, Mark, and Luke saying much about Jesus Christ as God, because I don't think it had really soaked in on them at that level of who he really was and the implications of him being the Son of God. Oh yeah, Son of God, Messiah, yeah, we know all that. But somewhere along the line, somebody had the forehead slapping experience and said, wait a minute. If he's the Son of God, he's like God. And then remember he said this? Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Remember he said this? Yeah, I forgot it. There were all kinds of things that John recalled and put together that these other guys had not, that they didn't remember. Now, that raises a whole other question. And that question is, am I trying to say that these men were writing the New Testament on their own? What about divine inspiration? What about, that these men spoke as the Holy Spirit gave them utterance and so forth? What about that? Did you ever think about that? That why do we have in gospel accounts, and I hate to disturb your complacency on this, but I'm going to do it anyway. We have events, A, B, and C, in one gospel. We have the same set of events in the same time context listed for us as A, C, and B in another gospel. You can't get away from it. One of them recalled the order of events differently from another, or he had a reason for recording them in a different order because of the point he was trying to make. Now, does that pose a problem for you in terms of inspiration? Well, it doesn't for me. It will for some people, and a lot of people, if they've never been warned of this or given any inoculation on it, really get disturbed when they run across these things in studying the Bible. Here's an important thing for you to understand about the Bible. This is crucial to your understanding about the Bible. Is that one of the most common words that you find in the Bible, a combination of them, is either witness or testimony, right? These ideas of witness and testimony are crucial. At the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established, right? Now the question arises naturally, then why didn't Jesus write his own book? Because he could have, couldn't he? I mean, does anybody think that Jesus was illiterate? Jesus could have written his own book and then we wouldn't have a lot of these questions. In fact, he could have had one gospel by all these guys and we wouldn't have any of these questions. I studied, in fact, the life of Christ at a university once in a book called The Composite Gospel, where somebody had done just that. They'd taken all 4 Gospels and made a composite single gospel out of them. And if they'd done that in the first century, we wouldn't have anywhere near the questions we have today, or would we? The problem with it is, we would only have one witness to the things that Jesus did, not 2, not 3, not 4, which we have 4. And in the Bible, in biblical parlance, it is important that you have witnesses to testify of what they said. Now, if you have 4 witnesses that come into a courtroom and sit in a chair down there before you, and they ask them the question, attorney asks them the question, and every one of them answers the question exactly the same order, using the same words, what are you going to conclude? Huh? You don't believe them? Why don't you believe them? Been coached, right. They've been woodshedded, I think, to use the term. They've taken them out in the woodshed and they've got the story right before they let them come into court. In fact, you will see this all the time if you watch the talking heads on these political programs on the cable. You will hear precisely the same phrases coming out of them. It drives Bill O'Reilly of the O'Reilly Factor crazy because he's already got the talking points, here in front of him. He picks them up. And then they come on the show and they've got to memorize and they're going down the talking points as he's got right there. And they've all been woodshedded. They've all been taken to the woodshed, given their story, and they give it to you the same way, and therefore they are not believable. All right? They're not believable. I hear this kind of stuff, it drives me crazy too. I say, I can't believe this person, he's just spouting the same thing somebody gave him. I want to know how he feels about it. I want to know what he knows that nobody else knows. That's what I want to find out, and you can't get to that. Well, in the New Testament, you can get to it. Because the people who are writing here are witnesses. Witnesses. They are telling you what they saw, right? And as a consequence of them telling them what you saw, you can decide, are they telling the truth or are they lying? Now, here's another question. You're on a jury in a courtroom. I got a jury summons in my briefcase right now. You're on a jury in a courtroom, and they bring in two separate witnesses to a killing in a classroom in college. And one of the witnesses tells you that the man came into the room, shouted obscenities at the teacher, turned and waved his gun at the class, and then shot the teacher dead. The next person comes in and tells you that the man came into the classroom, waved his pistol at the students, turned around and shouted obscenities at the teacher, and then shot the teacher dead. Would you conclude that the witnesses were not reliable, even though they had the events out of order? No. You would conclude that the man they are describing, when they point the finger at the guy down here, shot the teacher dead, and whether or not he did it, waved his gun first or shouted obscenities first, is not important. It's only important as perhaps to showing motive, maybe it's a hate crime, as opposed to just an ordinary crime. It might have use there, but it would have no use otherwise. So this is the point I think you need to understand about the four Gospels when you ask the question the way you ask it, is that these men really were writing from different places, different times, and they were telling you what they saw, what they heard, what they experienced. Your job is sitting down to read through it and ask yourself, is there any way on God's green earth that these people could be lying about the resurrection of Jesus Christ? And the answer is no. The answer is no. They're not lying about it. They saw it, they experienced it, and they know it. And they are telling us about the teachings of Christ in a way that is believable and understandable. And you've got to, and this is why the word, not only are the words testimony and witness so common in the Bible, so is the word belief. Because you are the one that has to decide in court, do I believe the witness or not? You read the New Testament, you've got to decide, do I believe the testimony of these four men or not? And if not, we're wasting our time. Any other questions? Okay, it's 11:45, and let's see, what time we come back this afternoon? 2 o'clock. We'll start again this afternoon at 2 o'clock. I think there are many places around here where you can grab a bite to eat, and I want to thank all of you for coming this morning. If you'll rise, I'll ask God to bless you on your way and to finding your new meal.